So we have about a half an hour or so to make up a conversation. And frankly, we haven't rehearsed it, so I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk about.
Well, that was intentional.
Right, I know, because we didn't want to...
Screwed up.
Well, I'm committed to superiority. So just so you know that in this conversation, I'm committed to superiority.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So where do we start?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that is exciting for both of us is this idea of feedback and what it takes to really create the conditions for people to both have access to it and then to do something with it. And, you know, in my own experience, the DDO idea has allowed at least a certain kind of way of thinking about just, first of all, how important culture is to people's ability to actually say things. Like your research is saying the leaders all know, right, what makes for effectiveness. How much are they actively communicating it without the context of a 360 in which they have to be, reliably entering their responses. So what's the culture that allows people to both see things and say things while also being humble in saying things? And what does it take for you to actually receive that in real time? And so, that's exciting to me, and I know we're on the same page about that. We'll start there.
No, but well, first of all, these guys have made such a contribution to our field, Bob and Lisa, and just really want to acknowledge that. So I've known Bob for a long time, and frankly, his book, In Over Our Heads, unlocked the whole profile and the work on that. And of course, Lisa then comes in, starts working, and starts to get really, really practical. So I've been a student of their work, and so I just want to acknowledge that. And they've then taken, I've watched the progression, and Lisa's had a big hand in this, of Bob writing about the theory of stage development, how you assess it and measure it and so on, and then it becomes more and more practical. And so immunity to change is a really powerful practical process for helping people and organizations really shift on this stuff, like from the inside out. And then now you're taking it a step further and like, how do we really help that scale? And that's a conversation that we're both interested in. How do we really scale that?
Right. And
so the work around organizations that are deliberately developmental about what you just spoke about. And so I just want to kind of mention their new book. It's a huge contribution to the field about some of the organizations that are leading the way about how you do this, not just within a team or even in the extended leadership team, but literally creating top to bottom an organization that's designed determines performance, designed for supporting development.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about Lance's comments in the on the bus metaphor that you were using, and how much what a deliberately developmental organization does is to say to people, this is the bus we need to be on. If you don't want to be on it, that's fine. Like, there's no coercion. You're either on the bus or you're not on the bus, and how important that is, because some of the on the bus is both about we care about this mission, but it's also about the processes that we're committing to engage in so that we can actually make that mission come to fruition, and how much the vulnerability and honesty is a part of what you're asking people to shake their hands on, which is really, really wonderful.
Yeah, and it's not easy.
No, it's not easy, and I think the point you were making to Lance is it does start at the top, and if you're not modeling it, people are keenly watching. What are you doing, right? And are you actually walking the talk? And the whole idea of our being vulnerable that takes a lot of courage to do that, and people are vigilant around the ways that may get abused. And so if you can walk the talk, I think it just creates a whole set of possibilities people have never really even been exposed to in work settings, because so often, to go to that last quote in my talk, so often what our energy is being expended around is looking good.
Yeah, I mean, I show up, I'm nervous to talk. If I listen to all that, I'm committed to looking good, right? Not looking good, not okay. So it's like so human.
Absolutely, and what I've been very struck by is how much of a shared assumption there is in many organizations around needing to know. Like, you have to be an expert. And if we are going to be really honest about the environment in which we're operating and the extent to which it is just replete with, adaptive challenges, you can't know. You can't know. And so to what extent can the environment be a place where we can actually say, I don't know? And we need to have a process by which we can get to know better and begin to experiment with some things. And I think that's been really one of my biggest takeaways from seeing how deliberately developmental organizations operate. There's just an openness for learning. And you need feedback.
Well, and it's interesting because I was with my partner, Bill Adams, who was here last year. We did this dance together last year. And we were talking about some new framing that's coming out around the complexity gap. Like if you just would rank what level of complexity are you into, from certain, stable, not very volatile, to really uncertain, really volatile. There's a whole range in that spectrum, right? Where's your organization? What kind of complexity are you in as an organization? And then how complex is your leadership, individually and collective, in order to deal with that? And so as we were talking, and of course that gets huge resonance, because we're all in a gap. In other words, we're all in a development gap. We're all over our heads. And it's like what occurred to us, no shame in that.
Right.
That's reality. And actually what's happening with the pace of things, it's actually putting an adaptive pressure on us. So if you're in over your head, welcome to the club. It's can we just humanize it, that we don't know?
Right.
And that we're trying to figure it out, and that it's more complex than any one of us can get our arms and mind around. And therefore, the utter necessity of a deliberately developmental organization. Like, if we can't really accelerate the pace at which everybody is evolving, we're not going to thrive in the kind of future. I don't know if I mentioned this in my talk, but we recently were talking with Bob Johansson, and we signed off on his new book, right? That's coming out. He says the level of disruption that's coming at us is like unlike anything he's ever seen. So we're going to be in it. We're going to be so far over our heads most of the time going forward. And that's the developmental imperative. So I'm really, I think you're on the very leading edge of where we need to go.
Yeah, and that said, I'm sure for many people in any group, it's scary. You don't know what you don't know, and you only know it's going to be really uncomfortable. And you're going to make mistakes, and how forgiving is the environment, is the world making mistakes, and it's all, it's definitely much messier.
So, if you could summarize what you think are some of the key things that developmental organizations are really doing well, or a couple of highlights of what really works, if you're going to put in place an everyone culture.
Yes. I'm going to go back to the image of the 3 interlocking circles because I think it provides a heuristic for that. That everybody has an edge is really important, because if you don't know what you're working on, it's going to be very hard to actually make any headway. Right? So I need to acknowledge what that is, and in the best of the DDO qualities that we've seen, not only do I know mine, but I know yours. I know yours. And we all know one another's, because part of the, now I'm going ahead to the practice as part of the
Let me
groups.
just pause you there.
Yeah.
That's where I get at no shame in that.
Yes.
So I
that's
have
right.
an edge. I've met my edge. What if we created a culture where, well, of course you have an edge. Right?
Right. That's right.
Instead of the culture which encourages us to all hide behind
That's right. The looking good.
looking good.
Right. That's right.
So that's huge.
It is.
It's like actually creating a safe place to be great.
Yes. Yeah. Right. It takes it as a given. We can keep growing, and the more the environment keeps creating pressures for us, we have to be able to keep growing. There's no reason for us to think that how we came into this is going to actually serve us all the way that we need to. So I think that is very important, and the fact that we all know what one another is up to now takes us to the grooves idea, because I feel responsible to your development.
Right.
And you feel responsible to mine.
Right.
And it is, we're not competing with one another. And that's really, really important, because in many places, not only is the looking good on behalf of, I get to be the star here, but often it's at the expense of other people. And if we can all be in this together, know what one another is working on, and I can be in a meeting with you where I'm giving you feedback, often in these DDOs in real time, about we're off task here. You need to rein us back in. You need to know that, and I'm not going to hold that and wait until the end of the meeting and go to the people and say, that was a ridiculous waste of time, right? I'm going to, so it actually reminds me of something that you were saying earlier, which is about, nobody, I can't remember quite how you said this, but nobody signs up to say, okay, I'm just going to show up and not tell the truth today.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Right, but the telling of the
Will
truth,
Schultz.
it turns out it makes a pretty big difference in terms of people being able to engage the real stuff that has to happen, right? And how many conversations in non-DDO settings are characterized by people withholding what they're actually thinking, for whatever the variety of reasons are. But then, then we're operating with, at least one hand tied behind each person's back, and expecting that we're going to have good results from that. So one of the grooves is around feedback, and one of the grooves in one of the organizations we're working in right now is actually to do a check-in around your level of current transparency. So we'll do a timeout and just say, where are you personally in terms of your own having stepped up into the conversation to say what you're thinking about? And so people have a chance to do a kind of self-calibration here. And that's an example of a groove. Another example of a kind of groove is where you've got some pretty core meetings that happen, and so say it's a leadership team meeting, and there's very frequent assessments that everybody formally makes of what the value of that meeting was. And that feedback comes back into the group's functioning, so it becomes part of what we're actually looking at. Is it clear what our agenda is? Some of it seems is just plain old meeting, this is just how you have a good meeting, but a lot of it is also then about how transparent have we been? Have we gotten to the real issues here? How much are we actually taking one another on here? Those sorts of things. So that's just another example of a
perhaps
group.
as the leader of that meeting, I'm showing up in a way that enables that or shuts it down.
Right, that's right. So those are examples of grooves, but you need to have a home that allows for all of that to be taking place. And that home is basically the sense of we belong here, and I can still belong when I'm not showing up in real time as somebody who's leading the meeting who's totally got my act together. And that's okay. I need to know. You don't see that I'm really stepping
Showing
up
up.
sufficiently, but I don't feel like I am being ridiculed or made smaller as a consequence.
So it's not an expectation of perfection.
Right, that's
It's like,
right.
oh, he's not showing up today. That's welcome too.
Yes, that's right.
Now let's have that conversation.
That's right. And so the ways that somebody can feel like threatened in a situation, there's space in a home that actually makes room for, I'm feeling like I just can't take this next step out here with the rest of you. And there's a safe environment in which to do that.
I remember a conversation with my daughter, Katherine, who's probably watching. I won't get into the particulars, but we got to talking about our
She's
family.
happy for that, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. We got to talking about our family and its history and some of the questions she was raising. I was quite open about what we've been through, and at some point I just broke down and cried because it was so beautiful in its imperfection. Like none of us are perfect. We're all just as messy beings that are,
Yes.
and love each other anyway, support each other anyway, even though at times it didn't look that way necessarily. But how beautiful in its imperfection. So that's
a beautiful
home,
example. That's
right?
home. That's
Yeah.
right. That is welcome. So those are just a few.
And actually, if marriage or family is a place for learning love, then unconditional love is actually all of that imperfection. So when I expect it to be other than that, it's really that I'm committed to not learning unconditional love.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, and whatever it is you're protecting in yourself that makes it hard for you to be accepting somebody
Right.
else's imperfection. What's that mean about me? Did I do a bad job here? This is a reflection of me, an extension of me, something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I'm struck too by those four circles when I saw them, what we're trying to set up in the leadership system in working with the extended leadership team in the organization. So yes, there's a lot of feedback. But so the words I used, the new one's accountability. So supportive, feedback-rich, accountable environment.
Yeah.
Right? And so we actually set up two circles of accountability. One, I go to people in my organization or peer group and I form a contract, an agreement for feedback, both verbal and then periodically I'm going to pulse. I'm going to send out the pulse survey. So I make an agreement that you're going to be an ongoing participant with me around providing ongoing feedback and supporting me. And you're going to be clear on what I'm working on. So that's
Yes.
That's a similar
Yes,
theme,
absolutely.
right?
I hear the edge in that.
Right.
The pulse is an example
Right,
of a good groove.
Right.
And the fact that you're doing this with the intention
Right.
to support people, it's a way of challenging people
Right.
as you're supporting them.
And then we
That's
have the leader-to-leader groups, which are home, in a
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
Accountability, they're going to support me but hold me accountable, so it's another form of feedback with support and accountability.
Yeah. So what are the mechanisms that you use to help people hold one another accountable?
Well, each of the modules has a content teach, so they're learning stuff all along the way about how to do that really well.
Yeah.
And they're also learning things around, for example, beliefs and assumptions. So
Their own beliefs and
their
assumptions?
own, and then, the whole notion of the one big assumption.
Yeah.
And so so I'm learning to mentor, I'm learning to coach, I'm learning to provide feedback, how to do that well. I'm starting to sort for my own and working with others around their one big assumption.
Yes.
So it's
And I can imagine, tell me if this is right, that in the process of my learning those things, I may discover my own edge around those. Like I can discover, oh, I've got a lot that's happening, in the wedge where I want to please people. It makes it
yeah.
really hard for me to hold people accountable if that's what's happening for me. Yeah.
Exactly. I stepped into a group that Bill was running, a Honda group, to teach a thing on relationships. the module on relationships. And just, okay, everybody up, stand around the mat. What are you learning about creative and reactive? And they went on for half an hour. Very open, very transparent, very vulnerable. Here's the stretch, here's the edge, here's what I keep falling back, but noticing that whole, I talk quite openly about.
Yeah.
So I was struck by a lot of what you talked about and how we see that playing out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So how about we have 10 minutes left. We give the group here an opportunity to ask questions that they might have. You game. Shift the gear.
Good. You'll see me next year, so, you know, I mean, talk to Lee. What questions do you have?
So question in the back, and if you can say it loudly, we'll repeat it so we can make sure everybody hears it.
My question is for you, Lisa.
Yeah.
In your model, in column 4, if you test, if you create a test on the assumptions that you have, and your test comes back as positive, what's the step there if your assumptions are correct?
Yes, okay, so the question is, in testing a big assumption, if it turns out that the data you collect confirms it, that it's positive, then what do you do? So the answer is you create a next test. One test, either way, whether it disconfirms your big assumption or it confirms your big assumption, is not enough. You really need many more, 3, 4, 5. In that case, what the debrief would be, let's take a look at, first of all, did you enact the test the way that you intended to? Because sometimes what happens is, as people seek to engage in new behavior, they are unable to actually produce the new behavior in real time because they're so well practiced at this other behavior. So before you conclude it's not, that basically your big assumption is confirmed, you want to make sure you actually ran a test. And then if you did run a test, then what you want to do in the debrief is just try to understand what might be the conditions that led that to be accurate. So let's understand more about the who in that situation, the what might have contributed to that, so that your next test then becomes something you can test that against, and that's what makes it iterative.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of Albert Ellis, one of the founders of cognitive psychology, would have you run these tests, right? So patient, young person, young man presents with a deep need to be accepted and approved of, and so he can't ask anybody out. Just like a rejection would kill me, would destroy me. So he can't ask anybody out. So the homework, the test is ask 100 women out this week. But when you come back, I want you to ask 100 women out, right? Let's test that assumption. This is not a safe to fail experiment. This is like...
Well, especially if it's 100 random women.
So he comes back, and this is like, maybe you need to reframe what was success and what wasn't success in the test, because he comes back, he says, well, how'd it go? Well, I asked 100 women out. Did you get a date? No. Well, what'd you learn? I'm still here.
Right.
I'm still alive. I wasn't destroyed.
Yeah, that's actually a really important comment you're making, because very often underneath our assumptions there is some version of a psychic death.
Right.
For many people, when they go to this assumption of, if I do X or Y, I'm going to get fired. People are going to dislike me, stuff that is really core. And then sometimes it does happen, and then what they're in the position of really understanding is, and then what actually happened as a consequence of that. And, you'll only need to hear a few examples where people say, I actually ended up getting fired, and it was the most liberating experience in my life. Right? It wasn't anything they could have known was going to be liberating, because they were holding so tight to what was like they had to protect about themselves.
Yeah, when we do the certification, we teach a process called What's at Risk. Many of you probably know about this, right? And it's designed to really get down to that place where if the assumption were true, I would die.
Yeah.
Right? Like my whole identity is packaged around this assumption, which is utterly false. Mm-hmm. And for me, for example, when I talked about my arrogance, what I dropped, and this is a fairly recent piece of work, when I dropped right to the bottom of it, I am these ideas. These ideas are me. no separation between me and these ideas. Well, that makes disagreement with me a pretty tough thing for people, right? And so when I saw it, it was incredibly powerful, the intensity of that, and also at the same time, not at all true. Like, it's absolutely not true. And so part of the really powerful work that can happen when you get down to the one big thing is you completely see it as false. It's an illusion. I've believed it my whole life. I've lived my whole life, built a whole life around it, but it's actually at the core not true. And so every single wedge in the bottom half of the circle is one of those, has one of those associated with it.
Thank you. Other questions, please? Here.
I've read a little bit of research around how different levels actually receive feedback differently, and I think you're actually pointing to it in what you just described. And I'm curious how you've seen that play out in DDO-style structures, how people are held and how they receive feedback differently.
You want to repeat that? Repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question is, there is data out there that says people at different places in development receive feedback differentially, and you're asking what is our experience in DDOs around that. And I wish I could actually answer, but I'm not going to be able to, because we didn't go in at that level of our research to even have a sense of where people were developmentally. I mean, if I had to take a guess, I think like in one of our organizations, I think it's more likely, this is in one of the business that is engaged in theaters, that there are a number of people probably they're very young, in their teens, who might be even more stage 2 or more self-sovereign. And then there's a range in that organization to people who are post-self-authoring. So there is quite a range, but in terms of how people think about the delivery of the feedback and how it gets received, can't respond to. But it's a great question.
One of the thoughts about that would be, as a coach, how do I frame the feedback? We're learning a lot about framing, and I may have time to talk about that, but later this afternoon, but with some of the consultants who are going to stay here. But it's, so Bill, my partner, walks into a meeting to do a debrief on the 360 with a very senior leader in Europe. Walks in, the guy says, "You're not going to turn me into a touchy-feely type," first sentence. And so sits down, and then the conversation became about scale and your leadership ratio and multiple. It's all the stuff we talked about today, right? And all of a sudden I went, wait a minute, my leadership's not going to scale. And then you're into the four column process. I need to shift if I really want to scale my leadership. Big shift, but you're probably talking about a socialized mind, getting some tough feedback and doing this with it, right? And so how we frame it and help frame it into that mindset can be huge.
I think one of the kind of dimensions of a DDO that makes feedback so powerful, in a way, it's like a Trojan horse, where to belong in the organization requires that you be open to feedback. And so if I want to belong, which can be at some place in development really our main agenda, to be accepted, the paradox here is to be accepted, I need to be open, which begins to lay a foundation for people's opening to greater development. So there was somebody, yes, in the back, please.
I was really struck by your example, Lisa, of the individual who had shifted in terms, most particularly in terms of the way they were perceived by others. So I think it's one thing for any individual to make a change, it's another thing for other people to experience that change and endow that person as having made the change at a deeper level. How do you, through the process, how do you condition, or what do you do with the team members? Because it's, it's kind of it's about how the leader is endowed, not just what they're expressing themselves.
Yeah, so the question is about that it's important that the team members in the case example came to see this person quite differently? And are we doing something that actually helps team members to be offering their observations? And it gets to this basic thing, which is as a leader, we can have certain intentions, but it's the impact that really matters a lot. I think the having of a 360 is a really important intervention itself, because you are signaling to people that you are gathering their perspective, and depending on how you actually engage that, you are saying, I value your perspective. We encourage people, especially team leaders, to share with their team members when they've gotten their feedback. Here's some of the key things I heard. This is what it means to me. This is what my commitment is to the team, which makes them even then much more accountable in a way, so that becomes like a next level of an intervention. And then the having of a post check-in where people have the opportunity to be weighing in is also an intervention. So I think those three things, like minimally, are important to set the stage for how much the external experience matters as a leader makes progress.
I would think that in what you talked about before, the groove of being transparent, everybody has an edge, everybody knows what edge I'm working on, I'm constantly checking in and getting feedback around that edge, would actually accelerate the rate at which I grow, but also the rate at which they perceive me as having made a shift.
Yes, because you get more quality data.
Right away.
Right. Yes, and to be really, clear, the immunity to change methodology preceded by decades, the stuff that we've learned in the DDOs. So like the response to that question is really as much comes out of our learning. How do you help people who are engaging change work using just the immunity to change technology, and they don't necessarily have that kind of a culture yet. But then you can see how much that multiplies when you do have a culture that a DDO would sponsor. So we have 3 minutes left. Let's see if there are...
Right here, one right here.
And then we want to make sure.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it seems like an underlying theme of moving from this reactive style to this creative style of leadership. But you also mentioned about some of the positive qualities of a reactive style. If being so focused on that creative style, are you not going to sacrifice or in some way be detrimental to some of those positive elements? Sorry, Siri, is that one of yours? Sorry. Siri knows my voice too well. Do you think that something might be detrimental to some of these reactive qualities by focusing so much on getting to this creative space?
So if I hear the question, can we actually, the strengths of there are strengths in the reactive, can we actually undermine those strengths by being so deliberate or urgent about getting to creative space? That's a really great question. You may have something here, but my first thought is that's what it will feel like. So if you saw those, some of those assumptions, well, I won't be seen as superior. I'll lose my advantage, And so there is a period of time where things come apart before they come together. So, and when you talk with people about it, they're clear about that. When you start to really get into that conversation, I'll often say, like, I don't know who I am if I'm not that way, or I don't know how to be successful in that frame. This is what's brought me here. I don't know how to, and so that is the kind of heroic journey of the transition. Now, I don't know what your experience is, but if you step over that too quickly, you probably could have regression in terms of capability.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's most important to emphasize that these reactive tendencies are strengths being overused, and to help somebody to be connecting to what are the costs right now, and that there are benefits, help them know what the benefits are, but there are costs, and that's part of what you're trying to help them calibrate. And I like to use the metaphor of really just expanding people's repertoire, because the way they know, they keep using over and over and over again, and if they could see that actually there are other ways that they can operate, that creates degrees of freedom, which may allow them, nobody's going to take away what their strengths are from the reactive part, but they'll see that they'll actually get more mileage out of it.
The language we use is jettison keep the strength, jettison the liability. And but when you do that, you actually bring your strength into a higher order form of it. But it won't feel that way. So the high controller and the ability to get results moves into the high achiever, and it's a multiple in terms of performance increase. But you're still working the same strength. So it isn't that you let go of that strength, but you're running it in a different operating system, which gives it much more of a multiple and a very different impact.